Hey there, glad you're here. Tonight we're heading back to the medieval world, but not to castles or crusades. No kings, no knights, just bedtime, and something strange that might have been hiding under the sheets. Because long ago, some people believed frogs could help them sleep better, or heal their pain, or draw out the bad humors that made them sick. They tied frogs to their feet, their necks, even under their pillows, and no one thought it was weird. So get comfortable. Dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan if you like that soft background hum. And let's slip into a slower time when medicine was magic and bedtime might include a croaking roommate. If you enjoy stories like this, you can subscribe, but only if it helps you rest. Your knees ache again. You haven't walked far today, but the pain has returned. The healer came at dusk. She handed you a frog in a small cloth, told you to tie it to your foot, said it would draw out the illness, that its cold flesh would balance your humors. You didn't laugh, you just nodded, because at this point you'll try anything. You lie back on the straw mattress. It's warm, slightly damp. The frog doesn't move much. It's quiet outside. The kind of quiet that comes only in villages like yours, where night falls without resistance. You close your eyes. Not sure if the frog will help, but you're already breathing slower. And for now, that's enough. The fire is low now, just embers, spitting softly in the hearth. Outside, the wind shuffles through the trees, and a dog barks once before falling silent again. In the hush of night, you think about your body, the ache in your knees, the pressure behind your eyes. Not sharp pains, not tonight, just a heaviness, like something too warm pressing into your skin. In 1374, pain had no name you could trust, no diagnosis, no bacterium to blame. Only the unseen war of humors. Blood, phlegm, yellow bile, black bile. Everything inside you was made of these, and when one rose above the others, you suffered. A hot, red swelling in your joints meant too much yellow bile. A heavy sadness? That was black bile. A chest that rattled? Phlegm. Blood could mean fever, or lust, or simply too much life. So you bled it out or starved it, or balanced it with opposites. A hot, swollen knee meant you needed something cold and wet, something like a frog. The healer was young, but spoke with the weight of her mother's voice. She said the frog would balance your humors, that its damp skin would draw the heat from your bones. It wasn't superstition. It was order, method, the only science anyone knew. Because illness wasn't random, it was the body's language. If you listened right, you could make sense of it. You could fix it. And back then, fixing didn't mean sterilized tools or pills in brown bottles. It meant restoring balance, a frog on the foot, a poultice on the chest, a prayer whispered into the dark. They believed because belief was all they had. And sometimes belief is what starts the healing. You lie there, the frog tied loosely with twine to your ankle, barely moving. Its cool weight is real, grounding. Not magic, but not nothing. The humors swirl inside you, unseen. But tonight, they're calmer. Doctors, or leeches, as they were sometimes called, were rarely seen in villages like yours. Most knowledge came from word of mouth, passed through midwives and herb women who mixed sacred and secular without hesitation. Healing wasn't a field of study. It was a practice of survival. They believed the moon influenced the body, that dreams held warnings, that what you ate could tilt your balance. An apple was cooling, garlic was warming. Bread, especially if stale, could absorb bad humors if placed on a wound. Leeching, purging, fasting, sweating, each meant to tilt the invisible scales within you. Frogs were especially useful for their elemental properties. Cool and moist, amphibious, a creature of liminal spaces, half land, half water. That made them powerful in the logic of the day, not only symbolic but materially effective. If a sickness seemed to come from heat, then the frog's chill could pull it out. If it came from sin, the frog might bear it away like a scapegoat. In old herbals, physicians wrote of frogs alongside herbs like comfrey and mandrake. One noted that a frog placed on the tongue of a fevered child could stop delirium. Another recommended cutting the frog open and laying its insides directly on the skin. Absorption through sympathy. Of course, none of it would make sense today. But in 1374, it made all the sense in the world. The world itself was alive with signs, portents, symbols. Crows meant plague. Comets meant war. Your body was just another kind of text, written in fluids and flesh. And every healer knew how to read it. Before you lay down that night, you still had to live the day. You woke to a sky the color of iron. You fed the hens, hauled water, repaired the fence where the goats had chewed through again. Every movement was a negotiation with pain, the tightness in your back, the strange hollow feeling in your arms. There's no word for fatigue in the way we mean it now. They called it a draining of spirit, a thinning of essence. In your youth, that same ache would vanish after sleep or a drink of elderflower tonic. Now it lingers. Your steps are heavier, your breath shorter. You no longer run to the village bell. You listen to it from your doorway and let others carry the buckets. At market, you spoke with a neighbor who whispered that frogs had helped her uncle. Not cured him, but given him sleep for a week, straight enough to mend. She said it like a prayer, not a suggestion. You'd heard stories from other villages, too. A woman who had been bedridden for months but rose the morning after a frog ritual. A boy whose seizures ceased after a healer buried a frog beneath the threshold. A man who coughed blood until a frog was sewn into the lining of his cloak. It wasn't just the poor who believed. The wealthy had more expensive options, consulting physicians who trained in Paris or Bologna. Yet those men with robes and quills still carried with them the same ideas. They read Galen and Hippocrates, yes, but also practiced astrology, used colored stones to represent organs, and recommended frog-based cures. There was no separation yet between medicine, mysticism, and myth. It was a single fabric. In one preserved manuscript from Montpellier, a recipe for fever includes the phrase, "Bind the living frog with rosemary and salt, and let it rest on the brow until the heat flees." Another entry notes, "If the patient dreams of rivers, the humors are in motion. Apply cold things to the feet." And frogs were the coldest things they could find. Pain was not private in your world. It lived in the open. Your neighbors knew the rhythm of your limp. Your wife knew when your hands would shake before you did. Illness shaped the shape of your house, where the chair was moved, which bowl held steeping herbs, which corner the frog waited in. And when a villager died, the house was swept with broom made of thistle. The bed burned, the well sealed. Illness was never seen as chance. It was imbalance made visible. It was a sign. Still you tried. The healer came at dusk. She left you with instructions, a warm look, and silence. And now here you are. But there is more than one kind of pain. Some sits in your joints like a stone. Some coils in the gut, sluggish and unspoken. Some hovers just behind the eyes, waiting for a moment of weakness. And in medieval life, pain was ever present, physical, emotional, and spiritual. Healers understood this. They treated not only the body but the soul. Confession was medicine. Fasting was purification. Penance could be a kind of cure. The church was the physician of last resort, and the soul's illness was thought to spill into the flesh. A man with unconfessed sin might feel it in his chest like a weight. A woman might find her womb wandering, bringing madness or melancholy, the remedy, prayer, holy water, a pilgrimage, and yes, sometimes a frog. There are written records of rituals involving not just the sick, but their families. A mother might fast alongside her feverish child. A husband might place his own bloodied thumb on the bedpost to draw the sickness away. There were incantations, herbs, and stories passed from one house to the next. The same ritual that calmed your neighbor's cough might be repeated, word for word, in your own cottage a week later. And if it didn't work, you didn't blame the ritual. You blamed timing, or the phase of the moon, or perhaps the strength of the sin, because medicine in 1374 was not a science of control. It was a conversation with the world, with God, with forces invisible and barely understood. The frog, cold and alive, was a negotiator, a go-between, a silent participant in the dialogue between body and spirit. And now it lies beside you, breathing slow. You wonder if it understands its role, if it senses the sickness it's meant to draw from you. Perhaps it does. Or perhaps it only knows the warmth of your skin, the dim light, the weight of twine around its middle. Outside, the stars are bright, too many to count. They, too, were read as part of the body's story. A birth under Mars brought heat. Under Saturn, melancholy. The stars marked more than seasons. They marked the illnesses to come. But inside, in this moment, it is quiet. And for a world that never stopped moving, never stopped aching, this quiet is rare. The frog breathes. You breathe. Tomorrow you will wake. You will check the frog. You will try to remember how it felt to believe. And perhaps, if only for a moment, you will believe again. The frog is still tied to your ankle, its skin cool against your warmth. It hasn't moved much, though you can feel its small, slow breath, a tiny expansion, a ripple of life pressed against your skin. You think about the healer's hands again, practiced, confident, looping the twine with a kind of tenderness that didn't feel clinical, but almost ceremonial. She had tied frogs before. She knew which ones were too restless, too thin, too dry. And she chose this one for you, a plump, dark-backed creature with wide yellow eyes that blinked without urgency. Not magic, she had said, just the body doing what it must, with help. You didn't argue. These days you don't argue with anything that offers even a flicker of hope. Frogs had long been used for things no other creature would be asked to do. They were versatile, responsive, and always just the right kind of discomfort. In folk medicine, their utility wasn't just superstition, it was observation over time. A cold creature, wet to the touch, slow in its movements, quiet in its presence. Everything about a frog opposed the fiery excesses of the sick body. When a joint was swollen, when the chest burned, when the head throbbed with invisible heat, the solution wasn't always something you drank. Sometimes it was something you tied on, bound flesh to flesh, the body speaking to another, more perfect version of itself. Frogs were placed on the soles of the feet for gout, their cool bellies pressed against cracked, aching skin. For a sore throat, they were tied gently to the neck, nestled against the pulse. When someone suffered fever dreams, the healer might split a frog lengthwise and place it open side down across the chest or forehead. There were steps. Wash the frog first, but only with spring water. Speak to it, calm it. Never harvest them on a Sunday. And if the illness was caused by sin, the frog must be released under a waning moon, not buried, lest the sickness linger in the earth. Some frogs were chosen based on their coloring. A green frog for heat, a dark one for melancholy. Spotted frogs for confusion of the humors, pale ones for blood ailments. The old herbals had entries about them, sometimes squeezed between entries for fox bile and powdered horn. One, translated roughly from a French compendium, advised, Place a live frog in a sack of linen, bind it to the region of pain, and do not speak until dawn. Should it perish, the affliction is weakened. Another warned against frogs taken from still water, calling them sluggish of spirit and unfit for healing. The best frogs came from flowing streams, water touched by light, the kind that sang in its passing. There were rituals too complex, specific, and passed down like recipes. The frog must be placed by candlelight, one prayer muttered beneath breath, salt scattered under the bed to confuse spirits. In wealthier households, the process was more elaborate. Gold thread instead of twine, velvet cushions, ointments spread before application. But the logic was always the same. The frog was not just a tool. It was a vessel, an offering, a participant. You remember hearing of a woman in the next village who had tied frogs to her wrists every night for a month. Her husband said she'd been unable to sleep for over a year, some ailment of the soul, they thought. She began the ritual during Lent. No meat, no honey, only broth and frogs, tied and untied, living and dead. She began to sleep by the third night. By the seventh, she was singing again. By the end of the month, she claimed she no longer heard voices. Some called it coincidence. Others whispered that the frogs had taken her madness into themselves and carried it somewhere else. Not all outcomes were gentle. Some frogs were found the next morning stiff, bloated, their eyes clouded over with a film. Healers said this meant the frog had absorbed the sickness completely, too much, sometimes for its small body to bear. Others would disappear entirely. Unbound, they'd slip away during the night, leaving behind only the faintest outline in the straw bedding. Those people believed had carried the illness off bodily, walking it away into the woods where it would dissolve in dew. You recall a story from your childhood. A boy taken by fever, wrapped in wet cloth with frogs placed on his chest and belly. His mother sat with him for 3 nights. On the 4th he woke, cold but calm. The frogs were found beneath the bed alive, but silent for days. When they finally croaked again, they sounded strange, as if they'd swallowed something too large for their throats. Frogs were believed to know things, where the heat pooled in your body, where the illness hid. Some healers claimed the frog would resist being placed in the wrong spot, twitching, squirming, even leaping from the skin. Others said that when a frog was correctly placed, it would sigh. Not loudly, not dramatically, but just enough that the person beneath it felt a subtle release, as if something invisible had begun to shift. You listen for that sound now. You imagine you've heard it once or twice already. And still, the frog lies there, small, cool, present. Its belly moves with its breath. You wonder what it dreams of, if anything, whether it senses the ache in your joints or the heaviness in your lungs, whether it feels itself slowly filling with the fever you've been carrying for weeks. Or maybe it doesn't need to feel anything. Maybe just its presence is enough. A reminder that someone is here, that you are not entirely alone in the dim hollow of your body. You have no illusions. You know this won't fix you entirely. The healer didn't promise that. No one does. But maybe the point of the frog isn't to cure. Maybe it's just to keep you company through the worst of it. A living thing holding space for the body's long, strange conversation with itself. Tomorrow, you'll check it. If it's alive, that will mean something. If it's dead, that will mean something else. You'll do what must be done, bury it, or carry it to the stream. You won't tell anyone what you saw, what you felt. These things aren't shared casually. They're private, sacred, just between you and the frog. The light is nearly gone now. The coals in the hearth pulse faintly, a dull red heartbeat inside the dark. You can still hear the frog breathing. Or maybe it's your own breath, slowed by repetition, by habit. Night in your village doesn't fall the way it does in the city. There are no bells to mark the hour, No lanterns burning through the fog. Night just settles, quietly, without resistance. It seeps in through the slats of the door, through the thatched roof, through your skin. And when it comes, you don't resist. You lie down and surrender to the rhythm of sleep the same way your ancestors did, and theirs before them. Your bed isn't really a bed. It's a raised wooden frame, just high enough to keep you from the damp floor, covered in a tick stuffed with straw. The mattress sags slightly in the center, reshaped by years of weight and sweat and winter shivers. The blanket is coarse wool, thick enough to trap heat, but not thick enough to forget the cold. You don't sleep alone. You never have. Tonight it's just you and the frog, but most nights it's your wife beside you, or your youngest pressed against your side, or your mother-in-law's wheeze from the corner cot. Privacy is a luxury for the dead. The living sleep where they can. The bedtime ritual begins before the body ever lies down. It starts with closing the shutters, with checking the latch on the door, with whispering a line from a prayer you don't entirely remember. It continues with rubbing your joints, stretching your legs, placing the bowl of water near the fire so it doesn't freeze before morning. Sometimes you drink a sip of nettle tea. Sometimes you spit into the hearth for luck. Tonight, the ritual included the frog. That's new. But it fits. You tie it carefully, just as you were shown. Not tight enough to harm it, not so loose it can slip away. You feel its skin shift beneath your fingers, cool, moist, almost human in its pliability. The first touch startled you, but now it feels grounding, real. It reminds you of your own body in ways you don't fully understand. Maybe that's part of the ritual too. Remembering what you are under all the layers of cloth and pain and worry. You place the frog where the pain is most alive. The ankle, tonight. Sometimes it's the knee. Once, when your stomach felt like it was boiling from the inside, you lay on your back and set the frog directly on your navel. It didn't stay long, but that night you dreamt of rivers. In the dark you listen, not for intruders or wolves or spirits, though those fears are never far, but for the familiar sounds of the home at rest. The creak of the wood beams, the rustle of mice behind the grain sack, the pop of a log shifting in the hearth. These are bedtime sounds, markers of safety. And every night your body checks for them, confirms their presence before it dares to sleep. There are rules to this. Don't sleep on your left side, it encourages melancholy. Don't fall asleep while angry, it invites demons. Keep your feet warm, your heart light, and your head slightly elevated. A stone under your pillow can catch nightmares. An iron pin beneath the bed will keep the spirits from pressing your chest as you sleep. And if you're sick, truly sick, tie a frog to your flesh and let it draw the fire out. No one calls it comfortable. The frog isn't soft, isn't soothing in the way a balm or blanket might be. It's a living thing. It moves, it shifts. It sometimes makes a quiet, glottal noise that doesn't quite rise to a croak. You feel its limbs twitch now and then. Once you woke in the middle of the night, convinced it had crawled onto your chest, its belly pressing cold against your sternum. But it was still at your foot, unmoving, as if it had never left. The discomfort is part of the ritual. Healing in this world isn't supposed to be easy. If the frog was warm, silent, soft, it wouldn't work. It must challenge the body just enough to make it feel noticed. Just enough to remind it that the balance is shifting, that something is changing. The frog is a weight, a presence, a conversation starter between skin and spirit. Your wife once joked that if she died before you, she wanted to be buried with a frog on her chest, just in case the grave was too warm. You laughed, but quietly. You both knew it wasn't a joke. The ritual of the bed is sacred, not because it's beautiful, but because it's repeated. Every night in every home, by every body that hurts and hopes to wake up with a little less hurt. Whether it's a frog or a poultice or a whispered name tucked beneath the pillow, the meaning is the same. The body is wounded and the night is long, and so we prepare for it, not with defenses, but with strange, quiet offerings. You shift under the blanket. The frog stirs slightly. You exhale through your nose and feel your body sink a little deeper into the straw. The fire has gone out. The dark is complete. There's nothing left to do now but wait. Sleep, if it comes, will come slow. But that's all right. The ritual has already begun. And you are not alone in it. The fire has burned down to ash. The only warmth left is what clings to your own body and the faint touch of the frog's skin against your ankle. The room is still, but not silent. There's no such thing as true silence in a house like yours. Even in the deepest part of the night, something always moves. A beam creaks. A mouse skitters. Wind fingers its way through thatch and settles over everything like a wet cloth. You can hear the goats shifting in the shed outside. One of them snorts. Then the sound disappears again into the hush. But these are known sounds. Domestic, ordinary, the kind that belong to a home. The fear comes from what lives outside that, what lies beyond the shutter, beyond the weak wooden door barred with iron nails and good intentions. Night in your time isn't gentle. It isn't romantic or calm. It's vast, unknowable, alive. It presses against the walls with the weight of things unseen, thieves with knives, wolves with silver eyes, spirits that have no name and no shape but plenty of intent. You've heard the stories your whole life. The boy who vanished walking home from vespers. The old woman whose door was found open one morning, her bed empty, her bowl of ashes still warm. The midwife who swore she heard hoofbeats on the roof. These tales are not dismissed. They are woven into the logic of your days, and so you prepare for night not just with blankets and breath, but with symbols and protections. You don't sleep in the dark unguarded. There's iron beneath the bed frame. A pair of scissors hung near the door open to cut the path of any ill spirit. Salt is sprinkled in the corners of the room, a thin crust of white just visible in moonlight. In the cradle, a small bundle of dried herbs and a scrap of cloth with a prayer stitched into it. You remember the words, though you were never taught them. Everyone just knows. Protection is less about belief and more about repetition. You do what your mother did, what her mother did. The spell only works if it's been used before. The frog has become part of that now. Its presence is not only medicinal, it's protective. Something in its stillness wards off what doesn't belong. In your mind it joins the salt, the scissors, the whispered charm. You don't entirely know why, but that doesn't matter. It's been used before. That's all you need. The frog has been laid on the sick, placed over hearts and necks, tied to infants and elders alike. If it can draw out sickness, maybe it can keep the dark out, too. You can still hear the echo of the healer's voice. If it lives through the night, the balance is turning. But she also said something else, quieter, when she thought you weren't listening. Frogs don't fear what we fear. That's what makes them useful. And as odd as that sounded, it stayed with you. You think of that now, lying in the dark, every breath a measure of time. The frog fears nothing, not even this night. Outside, the wind changes. You know the sound of this shift. It comes low at first, a kind of exhale across the grass, then lifts just enough to rattle the shutters. It wakes the trees. Branches groan. A loose pail rolls across the yard. Then it passes again, leaving behind a stillness that feels more alert than peaceful. Your muscles stay tense for a few seconds longer, until the house reaffirms itself with its usual clicks and pops. Some people mark their doors with chalk. assemble a cross, a star, a name. Others keep dried rowan berries above the lintel, or a horse's tooth nailed to the frame. At the monastery near the edge of the forest, the brothers sleep with one eye open. They ring a bell at midnight, just once, to keep the dead from forgetting the boundary. You once asked why they did it, and the abbot simply said, "So we remember what side we're on." That made sense. The dead aren't cruel, he explained. They're just confused. Better to give them a sound to turn away from than risk them lingering too long. In some places, people say the frog can sense spirits, that if it starts to croak, even once, in the middle of the night, you should wake and relight the fire. That a frog that dies before dawn has seen something. That if you bury a frog under your home, it will whisper to the walls and keep them strong. You don't know where these stories come from. You just know you've heard them enough to take them seriously. The dark carries all kinds of things. Not just the living dangers, robbers, drunkards, desperate men, but the other kinds. Things that don't walk like you do. Shadows that stretch too far. Lights in the fields that don't belong to any fire. The feeling that something is watching you from the hedgerow, waiting for you to glance away from the path. There are rules to navigating the night. Don't whistle. Don't carry meat. Don't speak the names of the dead unless you want them to answer. If you must walk after sundown, keep a pen in your mouth and a prayer in your pocket. And if you're already in bed, the best thing you can do is stay still. Let the darkness pass over you like water. Don't call attention to yourself. Don't tempt it. And never, ever fall asleep without something watching the threshold. That's what the frog is now. Watching. Listening, or maybe just existing so purely in its own body that nothing can reach yours while it's near. You lie as still as you can. Your body aches. You feel the pulse in your ankle, faint against the frog's weight. It hasn't moved. You take that as a sign. You remember the stories, the ones told in hushes by firelight with the shutters drawn. The woman who laughed too loudly at a funeral and lost her voice that night. The boy who went to sleep with dirt under his nails and never woke. The man who burned sage for too long and saw something move in the smoke. You remember all of them. You don't question them now. The night is not the time for skepticism. It's the time for stillness, for silence, for small acts of protection. For frogs. The wind has quieted again. The house has gone still. You breathe slow, steady, not because you're calm, but because you know it helps. You focus on the frog, its cool presence, its breath, its silence. You think of all the other beds across the land, all the other bodies lying in the dark with frogs tied to limbs or resting in bowls beside the hearth. You're not alone. Not really. This is what people do, what they've always done. They prepare for the dark, and they wait for the morning. Maybe the frog is afraid of nothing. Maybe that's why it works. Maybe, in its own quiet way, it keeps fear from rising too high inside you. And maybe, just maybe, that's enough to get you through the night. It's easy to look back and see foolishness, to scoff at the frog, the rituals, the herbs tied in cloth, the prayers muttered over sore knees and blistered skin. But that's the comfort of hindsight. A view from a hill built on centuries of books and microscopes and sterile glass rooms. You weren't there. You didn't feel the ache in your bones with no name to call it. You didn't watch your child's fever climb while your prayers went unanswered. You didn't feel time slow around you as a cough lingered, as a wound refused to close, as breath grew thin and tight. In that world, logic was made from pattern, not proof, and frogs, oddly enough, fit the pattern. They understood the body as a map of elements, 4 fluids that swirled inside you like weather in a sealed jar. Blood, phlegm, yellow bile, black bile. Every discomfort, every twitch or ache or imbalance could be traced to one of them taking too much space. You weren't sick. You were tipped, tilted out of alignment, too much fire, too much cold. The frog's job was to pull you back toward center. They didn't need evidence in the way we mean it. They had experience, memory, faith. A man with swelling in the foot tied on a frog and felt relief the next morning. That was evidence. A child's cough quieted after a ritual involving wet clay, rosemary, and a frog in a bowl. That, too, was evidence. Repetition was reason. The frog wasn't just a creature. It was a substance, a living balm. Cool and moist in a time when heat and dryness were feared qualities. People feared fevers more than anything. Fire beneath the skin was not only painful, it was dangerous. It burned the mind, made people rant, see visions, forget names. And what better to draw it out than something that lived half in water, something that thrived in mud and shadow and chill. The frog was, in their eyes, a small, perfect antidote. There was also a belief rooted in sympathetic magic that like attracts like, or that opposites can balance each other. The world was a mirror. If something caused pain, its reflection could ease it. If a frog could live with cold blood and still leap through the world with vitality, maybe it could loan you some of that balance. Maybe it could absorb what you had too much of. This wasn't superstition in the sense of nonsense. It was structured, studied. Healers spent years learning these systems. It wasn't random, it was a science of patterns. Heat rose. Moisture soothed. Frogs were always moist. Therefore, frogs soothed. And they were dependable. You could always find one near a stream and a shaded puddle under a stone. They didn't run far. They didn't bite. They didn't die easily unless they were meant to. People noticed that. It meant something. They became part of the medicinal landscape alongside herbs, stones, minerals, oils, and prayer. In some records, frogs were listed in the same breath as crushed pearls or unicorn horn. Not because people thought they were magical, but because they had presence, reliability, a consistency that nature rarely offered. Some healers went further. They saw the frog as a middle being neither of the land nor entirely of the water. Something liminal, something between. Just like sickness itself, which was seen as a space between wellness and death. Frogs lived in that in-between. They understood it. They weren't just tools. They were participants in the great balancing act between elements. A woman once wrote that her healer told her to hold a frog under her tongue, not to swallow, not to chew, just to let it rest. She did it. Her fever broke the next day. She said the frog never blinked once the entire time. There was also the matter of what frogs didn't do. They didn't cry. They didn't bleed visibly. They didn't rot quickly. They died quietly, if they died at all. A creature so composed had to be good medicine. It didn't suffer like people did. And if it didn't suffer, then maybe it could hold your pain without breaking. Not all uses were bodily. Some used frogs to draw out spiritual afflictions. One ritual involved whispering your worst thoughts to the frog, your rage, your guilt, your dreams, and then placing it in a box buried for 7 days. When the box was opened, if the frog was gone, the illness had passed. If the frog was dead, it had sacrificed itself. If the frog was alive and staring upward, it had decided to stay with you. There were instructions for what to do in every case. These rituals were not guesswork. They were careful, emotional even, but precise. You weren't stupid if you used a frog. You were doing what made sense with the tools you had. Just as today someone might drink a green smoothie to flush toxins they can't name. Just as someone might sleep with a crystal under their pillow or take pills they don't fully understand because they trust the hands that offered them. Trust is the oldest part of medicine. It predates science, writing, even speech. The first cure was not a plant or a poultice. It was the feeling that someone was watching over you in the night, that the pain was being noticed, that something cold and quiet and alive was sharing the weight. The frog doesn't know any of this. It doesn't need to. You're the one who understands, or at least tries to. In a world where illness has no name and healing has no guarantee, understanding becomes a kind of cure in itself. To say this is why is to feel a little more control over something that cannot be controlled. And so the frog becomes logic. It becomes clarity. Lying there now with its weight against your skin, you don't feel silly. You feel seen. You're participating in something older than medicine, older than language, something closer to rhythm, to ritual, to hope. And in 1374, that was enough. Sometimes it still is. Morning does not arrive like a gift. Not in this world. It doesn't sweep in golden and bright with songbirds and soft linens. It seeps in, reluctantly, pale and gray at first, then gaining color, slowly stirring the room in pieces. The corner of the hearth, the rim of the water bowl, the shape of your hand resting beneath the blanket, and finally the frog. You open your eyes before the light touches everything. Not because you're eager, but because the body wakes from habit, not readiness. Your joints ache. There's a stiffness in your chest where breath used to come easier. For a moment you lie still, eyes open, listening. There is no music to the morning, just the scrape of something outside, the call of a raven, the groan of a roof beam adjusting to the change in air. You're aware of your own weight, the mattress sagging in the same familiar way, the air cool on your face, the smell of ash, wool, and straw. And underneath it all, you remember there was a frog tied to your foot when you slept. Your eyes drop toward the edge of the blanket. The twine is still there, the lump of its body still visible, dark against your skin. It hasn't moved. You stare at it in the half-light. Is it breathing? You can't tell yet, but you don't rush to find out. You don't shake your leg or call for someone to help. You just wait. Because how the frog looks now, whether it's alive, dead, missing, will mean something. And you want to be ready for what it means. Some mornings people swore they woke lighter, that the ache had shifted, that their skin no longer burned or itched, that their mind was quieter. Some said their dreams were better, less violent, more ordered. Others said nothing changed in their body, but the house felt different, like something had been removed, emptied. They spoke of a stillness not caused by sleep, but by balance. These weren't miracles. No one used that word. They just said, I felt different. Sometimes the frog was dead, curled in on itself like a fist, its skin dry as if it had pulled in too much heat, too much sickness, and burned out from within. Those frogs were buried not in the compost or the ditch, but with care, under a stone, beside a running stream. Sometimes a prayer was spoken. Not a grand one, just a few words about rest, or service, or thanks. Children were told to be gentle with dead frogs. They carried someone's illness, their parents would say. Show respect. Other mornings the frog was gone entirely. The twine gnawed through or simply loose. No sign of it in the room. The healer would nod slowly when told. It took what it could, she'd say, as if explaining why a guest had left in the night without a goodbye. Some believed those frogs went to bury the illness themselves. Others said they returned to the stream to die unseen. One man said he found a frog in his garden 2 weeks after his wife's recovery, sitting under the rosemary bush. When he approached, it didn't move. He thought it might be the same one. He left it there. It was gone the next day, but there were stranger mornings, too. when the frog was still alive, still tied, but still, too still, breathing shallow, eyes wide open, as if it had seen something while you slept. Healers called this the keeping state. Not dead, not gone, holding. They said if the frog stayed like that through a second night, it meant the illness hadn't finished passing. Some wrapped the frog in wet cloth and left it by the bed. Others placed it in a bowl of rainwater and whispered to it. A few burned herbs around it, trying to urge it back into motion. But they never threw it away. That would be ungrateful. Dangerous, even. Frogs that lingered like that were seen as protectors, guardians, unfinished servants of balance. You move your foot slightly now. The frog responds barely. A slow shift of its flank. A breath, alive then, still with you. You release the smallest exhale. Not relief, exactly. Something quieter. Acceptance. The morning continues as it always does. You sit up slowly, wincing. Your joints crack. The chill has crept in again. You reach for the cup of water near the fire. It's not frozen, but close. You sip, taste earth ash, the rim of the wooden cup. You hear movement outside. The hens, impatient. Someone's chopping kindling 2 houses down. A dog barks, not in warning, just to be heard. There's work to be done. Pain or not, you'll rise. You'll feed the animals, wash your face, check the fence line. But for a few more moments, you just sit. You look at the frog. It stares back, expressionless. You wonder if it knows what it did last night, if anything passed between you, if it will leave tonight, or stay or never leave at all. Some people kept the same frog for weeks, reused it, tied it to different parts of the body each night. They swore it learned where the pain lived, that it adjusted, that it knew. Others said one night was enough, that too much use was greedy. You're not sure what you believe yet, but you don't untie the frog. Not yet. There's one last story the healer told you months ago, before your pain had truly settled in. A tale about a man who bound a frog to his chest every night for a year. He was plagued with night terrors, visions, fevers that came and went with no pattern. The frog never left, never died, never croaked. It simply stayed. The man got better, slowly, but the frog eventually refused to be removed. It lived in a pouch he wore beneath his tunic, then in a small clay bowl by his bedside. He said it had become part of his body's rhythm, like a second heart. One day the frog disappeared. The man cried, then slept peacefully every night after that until he died. Some say the frog had been keeping his soul in place. You look again at the one resting on your ankle. It does not feel like a miracle. It feels like an understanding. And that in this world might be better. You shift your legs. The frog doesn't resist. It goes where you move it, a quiet companion in the slow thaw of morning. You place your feet on the floor. The wood is cold. Your knees crack. Your breath fogs slightly. And for the first time in days, the pain hasn't grown worse overnight. Maybe it hasn't improved, but it hasn't spread. And that's something. You'll go about your day. You won't tell anyone how you slept. They'll ask, of course, and you'll say, better or about the same. You'll keep the rest for yourself. The frog, the breath, the stillness. You'll carry the morning inside you like a small ember, quiet, dim, but steady. And when night comes again, you'll decide what to do. Tie the frog again, let it go, bury it, or simply thank it. Whatever you choose, the morning has already done what it needed to do. It came back. And so did you. The frog was not the only one. That's the first thing to remember. Strange as it sounds now, tying a frog to your foot wasn't even the most unusual thing that might happen before sleep. In your time, the bed was not a place of peace. It was a battlefield, a sanctuary, a last-ditch altar. And when someone laid down in pain, they didn't do it alone, not really. They brought company. Creatures, objects, symbols, anything that might listen to the body's distress and help carry it into the night. Some people kept toads beneath their beds. Not frogs, but true toads, rough-skinned, knotted, squat things that seemed to have been carved from earth. They were considered more potent, more aggressive in their hunger. Healers would say that a toad pulls the poison with purpose, as if it had its own vendetta against human illness. There are stories of toads tied to the bellies of pregnant women to stop bleeding, toads held in the hands of epileptics during seizures. One manuscript describes a ritual in which a toad is placed on the bare chest and covered with hot linen, the heat driving the illness out and into the toad itself. The next morning, the toad would either be dead or would stare, unblinking, for hours. People took that stare seriously. Others used pigeons, gentle, soft birds believed to be spiritually clean. Their warmth was prized, especially for ailments of the chest or blood. A pigeon, laid belly down across a fevered face, was thought to draw the fire upward and away from the heart. The act was tender holding the bird gently, coaxing it to remain still, waiting for its rapid heartbeat to steady against the rhythm of the patient's breath. Some healers advised changing the pigeon out hourly. Others tied one beneath each armpit. A particularly devout woman once used 7 pigeons in one night, releasing each after it had sat with her husband's fevered body. He died anyway, but the birds were said to have flown in perfect silence, disappearing into the sky without a sound. That meant something. Dogs were less common, but not unheard of. Small ones, terriers mostly. They were said to be good for grief, especially when the illness was not of the flesh but of the mind. Melancholy was treated with warmth and presence, and nothing offered those more consistently than a dog. One tale tells of a widow who slept with her terrier curled at her throat every night for a year. She swore that the dog barked only when the sadness began to return, waking her before it could take hold. That kind of prevention was rare and cherished. Another man wrote that he placed his dog on his wife's feet after she'd fallen ill during childbirth. She would not keep still, he wrote, but the dog would growl whenever she thrashed. It reminded her to stay. Cats were trickier. They were seen as too independent to absorb illness, but some believed they could detect it. A cat that refused to lie near a certain part of the body might indicate an area of imbalance. A cat that purred near the lungs was considered a blessing. In a few places, black cats were tied near the bedpost to confuse the devil. If the devil approached, he would see the cat first and think the body already claimed. Rats were never invited, but they came anyway. The sick left food out on purpose, not to feed themselves, but to lure the rats away from their bodies while they slept. A bowl of oats, a crust of bread, sacrifices. It was said that a rat nibbling your toes in the night meant death. But if it stopped at the foot of the bed, you had time. People tracked such signs. The animals knew things. People just had to watch. Even insects had their place. A spider crushed in wine was said to cure convulsions. Ants placed in a cloth and laid across the forehead were thought to clear the mind. There is a record from a town in Saxony where people caught lightning bugs and pinned them to sleeves during plague season, hoping their glow would ward off the invisible. And then there were the still things, objects, substitutes for creatures, when creatures couldn't be found or weren't allowed. Onions sliced in half and placed on either side of the bed to absorb sickness. Moldy bread laid directly on wounds. A clove of garlic tucked into the ear to stop coughing. Clay bowls filled with river water placed beside the head to drink the night air. a strip of wool soaked in milk tied around the neck. Each item had a logic. Each was the result of memory, tradition, desperation. Charms were common. Small bundles wrapped in cloth, tied with hair or string, and laid between the breasts or beneath the chin. Inside, herbs, teeth, hair, dried seeds, pieces of metal, salt, sometimes even fingernail clippings. These were made by women who knew what plants spoke to what illnesses. Some charms were reused. Others were buried after use, especially if the sickness was thought to be spiritual. You don't keep what caught a demon. You put it in the ground. And then there were jars. Small clay vessels filled with water, left uncorked beside the bed. Before sleep, the person would whisper their illness into the jar, quiet, intentional. Then they sealed it with wax in the morning. Some jars were stored for years. Others were tossed into rivers at equinox. These weren't just containers. They were witnesses, repositories of suffering. What unites all these things, creature and object, isn't what they are, but what they do. They stay. They keep the body company in its pain. They give it something to react to, something to lean on. When no one can touch you without hurting, when prayer isn't enough, when the fever hasn't broken in days, sometimes all that's left is something else, warm, wet, still. Something to lie beside you and say, "Yes, I'm here too." You think of your frog now, still alive, still present. Maybe not so strange after all. It has joined a long lineage of nighttime companions, feathered, furred, scaled, and silent. You wonder if people in the next village are sleeping with pigeons, if someone you'll never meet is whispering to a bowl of river water, if somewhere a mother is laying a spider web across her child's chest while the wind rattles the shutters. It's easy to feel alone in illness. But these creatures, these objects, these strange companions, they form a kind of community. They say, you are not the first to suffer. You are not the only one trying to survive. They are not cures. They are not solutions. They are gestures, offerings, witnesses. And in a world with no antiseptic, no surgery, no understanding of infection or cells or immune response, these companions were what you had. They were all you had. Tonight it's the frog. Tomorrow maybe something else. But tonight this small creature with skin like stone and breath like mist is here. And that means, for now, so are you. You don't lie down just to recover. That's not how sleep works here. In your time, sleep isn't a recharge. It's not just a body pulling down the blinds and filing away memories. Sleep is a passage, a place, something you travel through, something that can go wrong, and something, in the eyes of the people around you, that doesn't fully belong to the living. Every night when you lower yourself into the straw and close your eyes, you cross a threshold. You give up control of the limbs you spent all day commanding. You surrender breath to something slower. Let thought untether itself from your will. And you hope quietly that you'll come back whole in the morning. Some people do, some don't. Sleep is not promised. It's permitted. In 1374, people didn't see sleep as a simple necessity. They saw it as dangerous, sacred, an in-between realm, thin-walled and porous. Dreams were messages, visions, warnings, sometimes sent by God, sometimes by the devil. They believed that what happened in sleep could alter your health, your fate, your soul. A nightmare wasn't just the mind entertaining itself. It was a visitor, and if you didn't take the proper steps, prayers, charms, protections, that visitor might not leave when the sun rose. That's why people tied things to themselves. Frogs, yes, but also bits of iron, pieces of ribbon, fragments of psalms written on vellum and slipped beneath the tongue. A woman might braid a lock of her child's hair into her nightdress to keep him close. A man might sleep facing east, to keep watch for angels. In your time, people measure sleep in hours. In this time, they measure it in spirits kept at bay. The church kept close watch on dreams. Confessors asked about them, especially the troubling ones. If you dreamed of fire, of falling, of blood, it was cause for concern. If you dreamed of lust, you were told to fast. If you dreamed of speaking animals, of fields that glowed, of rivers that spoke your name, it meant something. Everything meant something. Sleep was the place where God could speak to you directly, and so could anything else. Even healers, those rooted more in herbs than in sermons, knew the risks. They spoke softly before sleep, muttered words into the corners of the room, into the folds of blankets, into the frog's body itself. "Take it with you," they'd whisper. "Not just the heat, not just the pain. Take the wandering thing, the whisper, the weight." The frog in that moment became not just a physical object, but a guide, a passenger, something to travel with you through the dark and bring you out safely on the other side. There are stories of dreams wrapped tightly around healing. One speaks of a boy with a burning cough who dreamed of a lake. He walked to its edge and saw his mother's hands scoop water into his mouth. He woke soaked in sweat, but his breathing easy. Another woman dreamt of a field full of frogs. She lay down among them, and when she woke, her swollen joints had calmed. A monk once recorded a dream in which he held a candle over his own body and watched the flame pull out dark smoke from his belly. When he woke, the pain that had gripped him for days was gone. He wept, not because he was healed, but because he was seen. In these moments, the frog becomes more than a treatment. It becomes a vessel of sleep's intention, something to hold the line between body and spirit. Its cold flesh reminds you that you are still physical, still real, while your mind wanders elsewhere. Some believe the frog could absorb not only fever but dreams themselves, especially the bad ones, that by tying the frog to the ankle, you gave it permission to intercept what came crawling up from the floorboards at midnight. You let it take the visitations for you. Frogs were used in dream work as well. Some healers taught that if you placed a frog under your pillow wrapped in rosemary, never tied, you might receive a message from beyond. Not always clear, not always kind, but useful. The sick would lie still, hoping for images that could guide their next step. A symbol, a color, a face long gone. The frog would be removed at dawn, given thanks, and sometimes left at a crossroads to take the dream back into the land. But it wasn't always mystical. Sometimes it was just fear. The dark was never empty. People heard things, groans from the hearth, scratching behind the walls, the weight of something sitting on the chest. Nightmares weren't imagined. They were experienced physically, as if something had entered the body. Some called it night pressing. Others called it a visitation. A frog laid on the chest or stomach was thought to interrupt this. Its heart beat slower than yours. Its body patient. It watched while you could not. Sleep was also where illness spoke its loudest. What the body held in during daylight, the tremors, the hunger, the fear, came rushing out in the dark. People writhed. They moaned. Some called out names. Others curled into themselves like infants. There are accounts of men who wept in their sleep every night for years and never remembered doing it. Their wives simply placed a frog at the base of the bed and cleaned it in the morning. And yet, sleep was still sought, prized, even feared. It was essential. It was the only time the body could stop arguing with itself, could lie quiet long enough for the frog to do its work, to pull the heat from the blood, the bile from the belly, the shiver from the lungs. When someone was truly ill, the first question asked in the morning wasn't, "Are you hungry?" or "Do you hurt?" It was, "Did you sleep?" And sometimes, "Did the frog stay?" You think now of how sleep comes to you. Slow, reluctant, sometimes not at all. You've had nights when your eyes refused to close, your limbs refused to settle, when your mind leapt from worry to memory to grief without pause. But with the frog beside you, something shifted. Not silence, not peace, but a kind of weight, as if the night were being carried by someone else, as if you were being watched without being judged. You don't remember what you dreamed last night, but you remember how it felt to be seen. And now the frog still rests, alive, quiet, present. A sentinel of the dark. Maybe it did nothing. Maybe all the healing you felt has been your own body slowly remembering itself. But maybe, just maybe, this small, cold creature kept something at bay, took a dream that was meant for you, or at least bore witness while you passed through something you couldn't name. Because in this time, sleep isn't just for rest. It's for crossing over, for returning, for transformation. And in that long, dark river of the unconscious, everyone needs a guide. Yours just happens to be green, silent, and breathing slow beside your foot. The frog is gone now. You untied it slowly this morning. It didn't resist. It didn't leap away in fear or freeze in panic. It just sat in your hand, still and slick and calm, as if it knew its part was done. You carried it to the stream at the edge of the village, the same place where your grandmother once washed linens, where your wife once pulled water during harvest, where you once watched your son skip stones in a year that now feels like someone else's memory. You crouched beside the water, held the frog for a moment longer, and then let it slide from your hand into the current. It didn't look back. Frogs never do. You stood there a long time, longer than you meant to. The wind moved through the trees above you, and for a moment you listened for something, an echo, a farewell, the last rustle of illness leaving your skin. But there was only the water, and your breath, and the aching truth that something had shifted. Not dramatically, not enough to shout about, but enough that you felt different inside your own body. And now, walking back to your cottage, you wonder, what did it all mean? The frog, the rituals, the prayers and poultices and night-long vigils. Why does it matter that people once tied animals to themselves to ward off the dark? Why do you still believe in some small corner of your heart that it helped? Maybe it's because healing, more than anything, is about story, and people then and now are creatures of story. You give shape to what you don't understand. You find rhythm in suffering. You make rituals out of chaos. In 1374, people trusted frogs, not because they were beautiful or wise or sacred, but because they were consistent. They were there, always cold, always still, always willing. They did not complain. They did not require explanation. They simply accepted the body's burden, and in doing so, gave that burden shape. The world was not kind then. It isn't now. Illness came without warning, without fairness. People watched loved ones vanish into fever, into madness, into silence. And when that happened, they didn't reach for certainty. They reached for what was near. A frog, a charm, a word repeated until it felt like prayer. They built meaning from what they had. That's not superstition. That's survival. And really, what have we changed? Today we reach for pills, for apps, for smooth voices on screens, telling us to breathe in, breathe out, close our eyes. We monitor our steps, our calories, our sleep cycles. We swallow capsules with names we can't pronounce. We light candles not for the saints, but for mood. We wear crystals. We journal. We fast. We detox. We whisper mantras into dark bedrooms, hoping for a better morning. The frog is gone, but the ritual remains. The form shifts. The desire doesn't. We want our healing to make sense. We want to look at our pain and say, this is why. We want to believe that something we do tonight, some gesture, some object, some quiet choice might make us feel better tomorrow. That maybe if we place the right thing beside our body, the suffering will lift just a little. That's not foolish. That's human. We still draw lines between the visible and the unseen. We may not speak of humors anymore, but we talk of energy, of imbalance, of toxins, and alignment. We say the gut is a second brain. We say trauma lives in the body. We believe that sadness can make us sick, that anger can give us ulcers, that fear tightens the chest, and grief floods the lungs. Are we wrong? Or are we simply using different language to describe the same truths? Back then, they trusted frogs. Now we trust wearables. We set alarms to remind us to drink water. We track symptoms with sliders. We light incense. We listen to thunderstorm loops in the hope that something, anything, will coax our bodies toward peace. These aren't decorations. They're rituals. Just like the frog tied to the ankle. Just like the bowl of salt under the bed. We've digitized the magic, made it sleeker, but we haven't abandoned it. Some say the frog was just a placebo, a symbol. But what is a placebo, really, if not belief doing the only thing it can, stepping in when nothing else works? And why is that not real? If a frog can calm a burning joint just by being present, by inviting the body to notice itself again, then maybe that's as real as anything. Maybe presence is medicine. Maybe ritual is. You don't need to believe in everything to admit that something helped. You don't need to prove the science behind the frog to acknowledge that your pain felt smaller afterward. The body is complicated, the mind more so. And sometimes the right answer isn't explanation. It's story, because healing is and has always been a kind of storytelling, a way of saying, here's what happened, here's what I did, here's who stayed with me through the night, and here I am still. You don't remember everything the healer said. You don't need to. What you remember is her presence, her calm, the way she didn't flinch when she saw your swollen foot, the way she didn't promise anything but handed you the frog anyway. That gesture said more than 1,000 prescriptions ever could. You remember lying down with the frog. You remember the weight of it, the coolness, the way your body adjusted to it without needing to understand it. You remember waking up and not feeling worse. That was new. That was enough. Now the frog is gone. The pain, perhaps, will return. Perhaps it never left. But the story is different now. You're not just sick, you're someone who tried something. Someone who shared the night with a creature who asked nothing from you and gave something small in return. That's the legacy of all healing rituals, not their success, but their witness. They stay with you. They say, I was there. I helped. You endured. So what does all this say about us? It says we are creatures of meaning, of pattern, of aching and trying again. It says we are people who look into the dark and reach for something soft, something cool, something quiet to hold the pain with us. It says we don't want to suffer alone. And when we must suffer, we want that suffering to be part of something, a rhythm, a ritual, a story. We may not tie frogs to our feet anymore, but we still do what they did. We reach for whatever is near, whatever we think might hold our hurt, and we say, stay with me, just through the night, just until the morning. And sometimes that's enough. Before there were herbs, before there were charms, chants, frogs, or prayers, before illness had names, and before pain had purpose, there was fire. You don't think of it as medicine now, not in the same way you think of the frog or the healer's bundle. But that's only because it's always there, because its warmth is a given, because you've forgotten what it feels like to be truly cold. Not the chill of winter, but the cold of absence, of silence, of air without heat, of death. That cold, the kind that lives in the body long after the wind has passed. And against that, there is only one answer: the fire. When someone in the home becomes ill, the first reaction is not to reach for herbs or cloth or ritual. It's to tend the fire, to make it strong, to feed it, to sit by it. A woman with aching bones will pull her stool closer, hunch over the coals, and say nothing. A child with fever will be moved to a bed as close to the hearth as safety allows. An elder coughing blood will be given a blanket, still warm from the fire's edge. No explanation is needed. Fire helps. Fire listens. Fire holds. No one doubts this. No one questions it. Healers themselves often begin their work here. Before examining the patient, they crouch near the flames. They stir the coals, drop in a sprig of mint, a handful of ash, a pinch of salt. They watch the color of the burn, how quickly it catches, how the smoke bends. In this, they see signs. If the flame flutters sideways, the fever will rise. If it leans toward the patient, the sickness is reaching for the lungs. If the smoke pools on the ceiling without escaping, the spirit is still trapped in the chest. If the fire refuses to catch at all, something deeper has taken hold. None of this is explained. It is understood, not taught in words, but handed down in gestures, movements your grandmother made, and her mother, and the one before. There are things too old to be written, too known to require saying. Fire belongs to that category, and its healing doesn't just come from warmth. That's the surface of it. That's what you notice first. But beneath that, beneath the glow on the skin and the easing of the shiver, is something older. Fire gives order, rhythm. It divides the night into watchable portions. A log will burn for an hour. A kettle will whistle in 10 minutes. The coals will darken if not stirred every 2. Time in a sick room is otherwise unmeasured. Pain bends the hours, stretches the minutes, but fire remains honest. It gives you something real to hold on to. There is comfort in that. You remember when your mother was sick. You remember the way she stared into the hearth, not just for heat, but for direction, like she was waiting for it to answer. She would mutter her discomfort aloud. The ache has moved to my back. The cough is wet now. The dreams are darker. Not to you, not to anyone. Just toward the fire, and she'd wait. And sometimes she would nod afterward, as if the flames had spoken. Because the fire is not just for warmth or light or healing. It is also a companion, a witness, the only one who stays up all night without complaint. When you are sick and fevered, and the frog lies still against your foot, and everyone else is asleep, the fire stays awake, watching, holding vigil, breathing with you. Its flickers casting shapes on the wall that feel, at times, almost human. There are people who speak directly to the flames, not as prayer, not as poetry, but as conversation. They offer it their pain in pieces. They whisper symptoms as they feed it kindling. They ask questions they cannot voice aloud. Will I get better? Will it spread? Will the pain stop? The fire does not answer, but it listens better than any priest. Some say it is alive, not metaphorically, literally, that it feels, that it remembers, that the fire in your hearth carries the memory of every house it's warmed, every sickness it's seen, every body it's burned into ash when death could not be prevented, that it holds that memory the way your skin holds scars, quietly, permanently. That's why old fires burn better. Why coals passed down through generations are treated like relics. Not because they're useful, because they're wise. You've seen it yourself. A hearth fire that hasn't gone out in 20 years will catch dry wood in seconds. A new flame? It struggles, it hesitates. It's like watching a child try to carry water without spilling it. But the old fire, it knows. It has done this before. It does not fear the dark. And when the healer leaves, and the frog has done its work, and you are left alone in the house, with only your pain and your silence and your waiting, the fire is still there. It does not leave. It does not sleep. It holds the center of the home like a pulse. You breathe with it. Even now, you can feel the heat on your skin from where you lie. Dull, steady, low. You didn't ask it to help. But it does. Because that's what fire does. Always has. You wonder sometimes if it was the fire that taught people how to heal in the first place. Before the books, before the churches, before the frogs and the feathers and the bundles of root. When the first human curled up near warmth and realized that the pain was softer there. When the first mother noticed that her child slept easier facing the flames. When the first wound was held out to the smoke and stopped bleeding. Maybe the fire was the first healer because it asked for nothing and gave everything. Maybe everything we've done since has been trying to imitate that, through rituals, through care, through presence. Frogs come and go. Charms are lost. Prayers fade. But the fire remains, not just as light, not just as heat, but as memory. And when the world is cold and your body aches again, and nothing else seems to make sense, you can always return to it. Sit near it, say nothing, and let it do what it's always done, stay and heal. In your world, pain has no numbers, no charts, no clean white pages to mark how bad it feels. You do not point to smiley faces with mouths shaped like suffering. You do not rank it 1 through 10. Pain here is a shape, a sound, a memory. It is something you describe in metaphor, not measurement. And the words you choose say as much about you as they do about the ache itself. When someone in your village says they feel pain, they do not say it hurts. They say things like the heat has risen or the weight has moved. They say the fire has sunk into my bones, the worms are back in my belly, or my skin feels like it's listening too hard. They speak of pain like a visitor, like a presence that walks through the body in strange patterns. It comes and goes. It settles in the joints for winter. It climbs the spine like ivy. It moves from the chest to the arms when grief is too much to carry. These are not exaggerations. These are truths wrapped in symbol, shaped by centuries of observation and inherited belief. Pain in your time is not a thing to be named clinically. It is a thing to be witnessed communally. No one suffers in silence, not because they are strong, but because they are not expected to. Pain is not private. It is passed along, measured not in severity, but in impact. When someone says, "My legs have gone hollow," the whole room nods. They know what that means. When they say, "I dreamed of iron again," the healer doesn't ask why. She prepares something for the blood. The healer's role isn't just to treat. It's to listen, to translate. She knows that no two people describe the same pain in the same way. One man says his stomach feels like stones inside a sack. Another says it's like something coiled, waiting. One child weeps without words, and she places her hand on their brow, whispers something only the fire understands, and makes a tea so bitter it burns through the silence. There is a rhythm to these descriptions, a kind of poetry, but not for beauty, for accuracy, because pain is slippery. It hides. It pretends. It moves when you try to hold it still. And so people use stories to catch it. A man might describe the ache in his ribs by recounting a dream in which he was stabbed with a cold fish. A woman might explain her fever by saying she saw the moon inside her own mouth. These aren't lies. They're translations. You learn over time to listen for what the body cannot say plainly. Children especially have their own language. They speak of spiders in the belly, of fireflies in the ears, of birds under the skin. Adults learn not to correct them. A child who says a frog is whispering to their foot is not delusional. They're trying to explain inflammation. No one mocks that. If anything, it's taken as a sign the healing is beginning. Because once the pain can speak, it can begin to be answered. You remember when your own pain began. It wasn't sudden. It crept in. First the knees, then the lower back, then the quiet dread that followed you between chores. You couldn't explain it to your wife at first. You just said, "It feels like rain inside the bones." And she nodded. She brought out the frog without another word. She had heard those words before. Her father had said the same thing the year he started walking with a stick. In some parts of the region, pain is recorded in chalk. Not in journals, but on the walls near the hearth. Small symbols, one for each sensation. A spiral for dizziness. A jagged line for toothache. A curved hook for nausea. The sick person draws it each day before bed. And when the symbol vanishes for more than 3 days, it is believed the pain has gone. Not cured. Just departed. Maybe it will return, but for now the wall says otherwise. And people trust the wall more than they trust the body. Others keep pain objects. Not charms, those are for protection, but pieces of stone or wood that are kept in the pocket, in the shoe, tied to the wrist. When the pain is worst, the person squeezes it, taps it, speaks to it. Some objects are buried when the pain goes. Others are burned. Some are passed on like heirlooms. This was my mother's when the shaking came. This helped my brother through the fevers. Keep this in your left hand when the dreams are red. You once saw a woman paint her pain, not with color, but with ash. She dipped her fingers in the hearth and marked the floorboards with crude shapes. A heavy circle, a wavering line, a cluster of dots. She did this for 3 days. And on the 4th she washed it away with water she'd whispered into all night. She said the pain was in the ash now, not her. What this says about people is not that they're foolish, but that they're desperate to be understood. Pain is lonely. It isolates. The body begins to feel foreign. People look at you, but do not see. They ask how you feel, but do not hear. So you tell stories. You give shape to the ache. You teach it to speak. Even the frog becomes part of this language. Not just a cure, but a metaphor. People say, the frog still sleeps when the pain is quiet. The frog is leapt when it returns. I think the frog is listening when they can feel the illness shifting, looking for a new place to hide. The healer once told you that a patient, too ill to speak, tapped her ankle 3 times in the night. She understood. The frog had fallen. She tied it again. The patient slept till morning. There's tenderness in this, in giving your suffering language, in treating it not as weakness but as message, in making space for others to understand, not fix, not silence, but simply witness. And sometimes that's all healing needs, a listener. Now, when you feel the ache rise again, you don't panic. You name it, not in words your healer taught you. In words you've earned. You say, the warmth is thick today, or there's iron in my breath, and your wife brings water, and your daughter lights the fire, and you reach for the frog again, not because it is magic, but because it remembers what you mean when you say those things. It is part of your language now. And when someone asks, as they always do, how are you today? You do not say, worse or fine. You say, the fog is lifting, but the roots still ache, and they understand, and they nod, and they sit beside you in silence. That is how pain is shared, and that is how healing begins. You don't need to look out the window to know it's about to rain. You feel it in the bones before the clouds begin to gather. A stiffness in the knees, a buzzing behind the eyes, a slow drag in the shoulders, as if something has reached up from the soil and started pulling you back down. The old ones used to say, storms in the blood today. You understand now what they meant. In this world, weather is not just something outside the walls. It's something that lives inside you. Your body is not a sealed thing. It listens, it absorbs, it carries. And just as rivers rise with the rains, your joints swell with pressure. Just as winds bend the trees, your thoughts bend toward memory. There are days when the fog doesn't just roll across the valley, it fills your chest. Days when the sun burns too sharp and your skin recoils without knowing why. The weather moves through you. Always has. In 1374, people understood this without needing to explain it. They didn't speak of barometric pressure or serotonin levels. They didn't need to. They simply knew. The wind has a mood. The rain has a voice. The cold has a mission. The heat has a hunger. And your body, it is not separate from any of it. It is a field, a tide pool, a clay jar set out beneath the stars, shaped and reshaped by the sky above. Healers used weather the way others used words. They read the day before they read your pulse. A fever during a dry heat meant one thing. A cough during a misty dawn meant another. The same illness could have different causes, depending on whether the moon had waned or whether a thunderclap had been heard 3 nights prior. The body was always in conversation with the world around it, and healing meant learning how to listen to that conversation. Frogs, too, were part of this weather language. Their behavior predicted more than illness. A frog that croaked during daylight foretold heavy wind. A silent frog before sundown meant snow. A frog that refused to be still, even when tired, meant a sickness from the air itself, a wind-borne illness, invisible, carried on breath and rumor. You once watched a healer let a frog go because it would not stop moving. She whispered, "The sky's in his lungs. Let him return it." In some homes, people placed bowls of water beneath the bed to catch the air's weight. If the surface remained still overnight, they believed the soul had rested. If it rippled, even without breeze, something was stirring outside or within. Others hung feathers from their rafters. If the feather turned in the night, it meant the body had fought something unseen. If it dropped, someone in the home would fall ill within the week. But even these rituals were less about prediction and more about rhythm, recognition, a way of saying, "I see what's coming. I feel what's already begun." There was never an illusion of control, just participation, just respect, just the knowledge that the wind doesn't ask permission. It enters as it pleases. You remember a year when the weather changed overnight and early frost in September. 3 villagers took sick within days. 1 recovered, 2 did not. The healer blamed the sudden cold, said the lungs had not been warmed. After that, every home in the village left a burning ember near the door until the solstice passed. Not for heat, for memory, for warning. Even now, you feel it. The wind has shifted. The frog is gone. The healer hasn't visited in weeks. But your knee has stiffened again. Your dreams are slower. Your skin itches just below the surface, like the edge of a storm is brushing past. No one else has noticed yet, but you know. Your body always knows. It's not just illness. Grief has weather too. You felt it. The sudden cold of silence after someone leaves. The pressure in the chest, like thunder in the distance. The way old sadness rolls back, and like a fog at dusk. You try to ignore it, but your breath shortens. Your fingers ache, and the fire seems to flicker with less confidence. There are no potions for this, no roots to chew, but you do what people have always done. You prepare. You clean the house. You light the fire early. You whisper to the hearth. You gather what might bring comfort. You do not pray, not exactly, but you watch the wind, and you wait. Because that's what healing really is here. Not an end, not a cure, but a practice. A ritual of noticing, of staying aware, of understanding that your body is not simply yours. It is shaped by the moon and the rain, by the warmth of others and the cold of grief. It is a house with open windows. Things pass through. Most leave, some stay. And when they stay too long, you do what your mother did. You reach for the old signs. A frog, a bowl, a word repeated in the dark. You name the ache. You give it place. You let it move through you like weather, and you trust it will pass. You've seen it happen. A fever leaves with the sunrise. A cough lifts when the wind changes. A sadness fades after the snow melts. There is no logic to it, not by modern standards. But the logic of the body is older than the logic of the mind. It remembers, it listens. And so tonight, when you feel that ache returning, the one that speaks not of sickness, but of season, you say nothing. You simply bank the fire. You lay still, and you let the weather pass through you. Because in the end, you are not just flesh and bone. You are tide and fog and ash and light. You are animal and element. You are body, but also sky. And that is enough. The frog is gone. You didn't expect anything from it. And maybe that's why it helped. Maybe it wasn't the cold skin or the ritual or the humors. Maybe it was just the quiet sense that something stayed with you through the night. The pain didn't vanish, not completely, but it moved, softened, waited. The healer didn't promise anything, she never does. Just left you with the frog, the fire, and a silence deep enough to rest inside. Now the room is still, your body is slower, your breath easier. You're not sure if anything worked, but you slept. You're here. And sometimes that's enough. So rest now. The fire is low. The world is quiet. The ache will return, maybe. The wind will rise. But for tonight you are warm. You are still. You are held. No spells, no promises, just the memory of something ancient beside you in the dark. And the sense that healing doesn't have to be loud to be real. And somewhere, a frog gets to live another night.